All right, so get ready because today we're going to dive into something really, really unique,
Oh yeah,
for sure.
we're looking at energetic interference, and the source material we have for this is it's pretty wild.
Oh, yeah.
We've got this YouTube video, and it features this hypnotherapist. Calogero Grifasi is his name,
Okay.
and he's working with this client named Chiara, and it gets into some pretty unusual territory, let me tell you.
Yeah, you know what's interesting to me right off the bat is it's how this guy dives into the possibility of these external entities.
Yeah.
And they might actually be impacting Kiara's life. Like, it's not your typical self-help by any means.
No kidding. She's dealing with a lot. Like, she's got these conflicts with her mother. She's had this past regression experience that really shook her up. And she's dealing with insomnia. But what really stood out to me were these physical symptoms that she was describing, like leg pain pressure in her chest, vivid visions. It's almost like she's sensing that something's off, like something external is at play, you know? Yeah, and that feeling is definitely reinforced when she mentions a past experience she had with a different therapist where she felt like this uncomfortable energy exchange happening between them.
Yeah, that's a bit unnerving, to say the least. So how does this hypnotherapist, Grifasi, how does he approach the situation?
Well, he guides Kiara into this deep hypnotic state, encouraging her to visualize and interact with her own energy field. And this is where things start to get really interesting. Various entities emerge. First, there's Jaylee, and then there's Bellario, who Kiara describes as this snake-like water entity that's attached to her.
Okay, I gotta admit, snake-like water entity definitely pushes my skip button a little bit. But Chiara seems genuinely convinced that these entities are real. So how much stock do you put in these descriptions?
Well, it's important to remember that what we're dealing with here is Kira's subjective experience. The key takeaway here isn't necessarily whether these entities literally exist as she's describing them, but rather how she perceives them and the impact they seem to be having on her life.
That makes sense. So it's more about understanding her reality, whether or not we as observers fully buy into the specifics.
Exactly. And within Kiara's perceived reality, these entities are not just these passive observers. They're claiming to feed off of her energy, manipulate her emotions, even control her actions.
And that's where this idea of energetic interference comes in, right? Grafasi believes that we unknowingly allow these entities to attach to us through our negative emotions.
Precisely. It's almost like our emotional state can become this energetic doorway for these entities to latch onto. And what I find really fascinating is that Grafasi doesn't just try to banish these entities or destroy them. His approach is all about empowering Kiara to take control.
So he's not just trying to get rid of the entities, he's teaching her to manage them. That seems a little risky.
It's definitely unconventional. He guides her through a series of steps, like
Yeah.
identifying the entities, understanding their influence, reclaiming her energy, and setting boundaries. It's a very collaborative and empowering approach compared to what we might typically imagine in these situations.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, though, about the ethical considerations. I mean, is it really responsible to encourage someone to interact with and try to control entities that may be harmful?
That's a really valid question, and one we might want to explore further. But for now, let's stick with how Grafasi handles this specific session. Things take another interesting turn when he and Kiara try to get to the root of her anger toward her mother.
And this is where past life regression comes in, right? Always a fascinating and somewhat mind-bending concept.
Absolutely. Through the regression, Kiara describes being in this grassy field, around 28 years old, and holding hands with this figure that she initially believes to be her mother. But, and here's where it gets weird again, the figure has these animalistic features that resemble a grasshopper.
Okay, first, a snake-like water entity, now a grasshopper. What's with all the insect imagery? Is that a common thing in these sorts of hypnotherapy sessions?
It's definitely a recurring element in this particular session, and as Kiara explores this memory further, she realizes that this grasshopper figure isn't actually her mother, but someone entirely different.
Someone who seems to be holding her captive.
That's the sense we get. She feels this strong urge to escape this feeling of fear and betrayal. It's a pretty unsettling scene.
Not exactly a happy memory. But how does this past life experience relate to her anger towards her mother in her current life?
Well, this is where another person present in the session, Barbara, who's observing the energy of the situation, steps in with a crucial insight. Barbara senses that in this past life, Kiara's actual mother betrayed her, possibly even sold her to this grasshopper entity.
Hold on. Sold her. As in like some kind of transaction.
Yeah.
This just keeps getting stranger and stranger.
Yeah, Barbara picks up on this sense of power, and perhaps a promise of some sort of advantage being exchanged for the betrayal. She describes Kiara's mother in that past life as like a queen or a clan leader, someone in a position of authority.
Wow, so this wasn't just some random act of cruelty, it was a calculated decision. That's heartbreaking. And Grifasi believes that this feeling of betrayal is carrying over into Chiara's current life, fueling her anger toward her present-day mother.
That's his interpretation. He believes that these past life traumas can create energetic blockages that influence our current lives, even if we aren't consciously aware of them.
It's a pretty radical idea,
Right.
but I can see how it could be appealing. I mean, who hasn't felt like they're carrying baggage from somewhere they can't quite explain?
Exactly. And just as he guided Chiara to release those entities, he encourages her to release the trapped energy from this past life betrayal.
So he's essentially suggesting she go through another energetic cleansing, but this time focusing on emotional residue from a past life.
That's exactly what happens. She visualizes this trapped energy and imagines it dissolving, freeing herself from its grip.
And what's the outcome of this? Does she experience a shift in her emotions toward her mother?
Well, Grifasi asks her to visualize her relationship with her mother in the future, and she describes it as more loving, less fraught with tension. It seems like a positive step. But can simply visualizing a different future really overcome years of complex emotions? It's an intriguing question. Grifasi would likely say that it's not about erasing those emotions, but rather acknowledging their root cause, and then consciously choosing to release the energetic hold they have over us. It's about taking control of our own energetic narrative, rewriting the script, so to speak.
Speaking of rewriting scripts, we have another twist coming up, don't we?
Yeah,
Right before they can delve any deeper, the session gets interrupted.
right. And not just any interruption, they lose their internet connection. Talk about bad timing. They were right in the middle of some pretty intense work.
Yeah, you would think that would be jarring. But Chiara actually describes feeling a release of energy and a decrease in her physical discomfort as soon as the connection drops, almost like the intensity of the work overloaded the system.
And Grifasi interprets this as a sign that the energy release itself caused the technical disruption. This raises some fascinating questions about the potential power of these energetic processes. Can a release of energy really be strong enough to disrupt technology?
Okay, that's where things get really interesting, because it starts to blur the lines between what we consider real and imagined. If a purely energetic shift can have tangible effects in the physical world, that changes the game entirely.
It certainly opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. They do eventually manage to reconnect and finish the session. And it's in these final moments that Grifasi takes a really interesting approach. Instead of focusing solely on Chiara's individual experience, he shifts the conversation to this broader perspective, encouraging her to consider the nature of information itself, particularly as it relates to hypnotherapy.
So he's not just addressing her immediate concerns, he's prompting her to think critically about the whole process. I like that. It avoids that trap of blindly accepting everything that comes up in these sessions.
Exactly. And that's where we'll pick up after a short break. Stay with us as we explore the reliability of information gleaned from hypnotherapy and what Grifasi encourages Chiara to consider as she moves forward.
Sounds good.
All right.
See you in a bit. So we're back, and it's pretty mind-blowing to think about the potential power of energy, enough to maybe even disrupt technology. But I'm curious, before the interruption, Grifasi was guiding Chiara to release the energy from that past life's betrayal. Did that have any noticeable impact on her?
It's interesting you picked up on that. She does describe feeling a shift, but Grifasi doesn't just end the session there. He brings up a really important point, the potential unreliability of information gained through hypnotherapy.
That's refreshing. So often you see these dramatic sessions where everything is presented as absolute truth. But he's acknowledging that there's room for interpretation and even distortion.
Exactly. He even compares it to trying to communicate underwater with someone speaking a different language. It's a great analogy because it highlights how easily things can get lost in translation, especially when we're dealing with the subconscious mind.
So he's essentially saying don't just blindly accept everything that comes up in these sessions. Be discerning.
That's the key takeaway. He emphasizes the importance of identifying what resonates as true, while also recognizing the limitations of the process. It's about cultivating a healthy skepticism, even within a therapeutic setting.
I like that. It empowers the client to be an active participant in their own healing journey, rather than just passively accepting whatever the therapist tells them.
Yeah, and it also aligns with his broader perspective on energetic interference. Remember how he believes we unknowingly give entities permission to attach through our negative emotions.
Right, so it's not just about external forces acting upon us. It's about our own internal state creating vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of personal power comes in. Grifasi really emphasizes the power of our perceptions. What we believe to be true can shape our reality, even energetically.
That reminds me of the placebo effect.
Hmm.
Our beliefs have such a profound impact on our experiences.
Precisely. And Grifasi encourages Chiara to take ownership of those beliefs. He emphasizes the importance of choosing what she allows into her energetic space, what she releases. It's a proactive approach to energy management, rather than simply reacting to whatever shows up.
So it's not just about banishing entities. It's about taking responsibility for the energy we cultivate and project.
Yes. And this brings us to another intriguing aspect, how our energy interacts with the world around us. He reminds Chiara that we're all interconnected energetically, that the choices we make, the emotions we harbor, don't just impact ourselves, but also the people around us.
It's like that butterfly effect concept. But on an energetic level, our actions, even our thoughts and emotions, create ripples that extend far beyond ourselves.
It's a powerful concept, and it really makes you think about the responsibility we have for our own energetic output. If our negativity can attract unwanted entities, then our positivity can potentially create a more harmonious environment for ourselves and others.
It's not just about protecting ourselves from energetic interference. It's about consciously contributing to a more positive energetic ecosystem.
Exactly. And in the final moments of the session, Grifasi asks Chiara some thought-provoking questions that I think are relevant for you too. He asks, "What are you seeing now about your mother? And what emotions are you feeling now?"
He's really pushing her to reflect on the shifts she's experienced throughout the session. Remember at the beginning, she was consumed with anger toward her mother.
Right. And after releasing the energy of that past life betrayal, her perception seems to have changed. She describes feeling more neutral, calmer.
It's almost as if by releasing that old energetic pattern, she's created space for a new, more balanced perspective to emerge.
Exactly. And he follows up with another powerful question. What kind of relationship do you imagine having with your mother in the future?
He's encouraging her to envision a different future, one that isn't bounded by the past. But is that realistic? Can we really just choose a different reality?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it's one that every of us has to answer for ourselves. But Grifasi's approach definitely highlights the potential for transformation, the power of our minds to shape our experiences.
It definitely pushes the boundaries of what we might consider conventional therapy. But it also raises some fascinating questions about the nature of reality, the interconnectedness of energy, and the power we have to create our own experiences. And speaking of power, we haven't even touched on one of the most shocking elements of this entire session. Grifasi's encounter with three entities linked to him. Through Chiara's past life regression,
Right. Remember earlier we were discussing Chiara's past life regression, where she described being held captive by that grasshopper-like figure. Well, during that regression, she also described being in a session with a different therapist, a man named Giuseppe.
and this is where things take a really dark turn.
Absolutely. Chiara claimed that Giuseppe was exchanging energy with her in a way that felt incredibly wrong. She described these energy cords coming from his belly and attaching to her own, claiming he was using this exchange to boost his own energy and even to help other patients.
Wait, so he was essentially siphoning energy from his clients
Mm-hmm.
without their consent. That's a major ethical violation.
It certainly seems that way. And then the story gets even more unsettling. When Grifasi in the current session connects with Giuseppe energetically, he makes a shocking discovery.
I'm on the edge of my seat. What did he find?
It turns out Giuseppe was connected to three other entities. They were attached to his Cossygaks, feeding off the energy he was allegedly taking from Chiara, and presumably other patients.
Whoa. It was like an energetic pyramid scheme. He was taking energy from his clients, and these entities were profiting from it.
That's a pretty apt description. And what's even more bizarre is that when Grifasi confronts these entities, they're described as being euphoric, almost addicted to the energy they were receiving.
So they were essentially parasites, feeding off of Giuseppe's unethical actions. But what about Giuseppe? What happened to him?
Well, when Grifasi energetically disconnects the entities from Giuseppe, the man is left completely drained, practically lifeless. It's as if the entities were keeping him going, like some twisted life support system.
That's incredibly creepy. But it also highlights the potential dangers of these energetic exchanges when they're not conducted consciously and ethically.
It certainly does. And it raises even more questions about the nature of these entities, their motivations, and their impact on those they interact with.
I think it's safe to say this deep dive has taken us down some truly unexpected paths. We've gone from leg pain and insomnia to past lives, entities, and now an alleged case of energetic exploitation. within a therapeutic setting.
It's definitely a lot to unpack, but before we get too caught up in the unsettling details, I think it's important to circle back to something. Grifasi emphasizes throughout the session the importance of discernment. He reminds Chiara, and I think this is a valuable reminder for you as well, to be mindful of the information you receive, to trust your own intuition, and to always seek what resonates as true for you.
That's a great point. It's so easy to get swept up in the sensationalism of these stories. But ultimately, it's about finding what's meaningful for us as individuals
Yeah.
and applying that knowledge to our own
And
lives.
perhaps, just perhaps, keeping an open mind to the possibility that there's more to the universe than meets the eye.
I like that. Keeping an open mind without losing our critical thinking skills, that's the key. And speaking of open minds, this session has certainly given us a lot to consider. But the journey's not over yet. We still need to delve into Grifasi's concluding monologue and the final steps he guides Chiara through.
You're right, there's one final piece of this session that I think will be particularly thought-provoking, especially in light of everything we've discussed so far. He encourages Chiara to visualize a specific image. That, in his view, speaks volumes about the nature of our reality.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's take a short break and then dive into this final revelation and what it might mean for us.
Okay, so we're back, and I gotta say, this whole idea of energetic ecosystems and the potential for exploitation is pretty unsettling. It really makes you wonder, what kind of unseen forces might be at play in our lives.
Yeah, it's definitely food for thought. But remember, Grifasi emphasizes discernment throughout the session. He encourages Chiara to question everything, trust her intuition, and find what resonates as true for her. And I think that's a valuable reminder for all of us.
Absolutely. Blindly accepting anything, whether it's about entities or anything else, isn't helpful. But with a critical mind, we can learn and grow from these experiences. Exactly. And in the final moments of the session, Grifasi guides Chiara through this really powerful visualization that I think really encapsulates his perspective on all of this. He asks her to imagine this vast, infinite space filled with countless points of light.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Like a sea of stars almost. Each point of light representing.
Each point of light represents a consciousness, an individual energetic field. And as Chiara observes this vast expanse, Grifasi points out that each of these points of light is constantly emitting and receiving energy, influencing and being influenced by every other point of light.
It's a beautiful image, but it also highlights the complexity of this energetic web we're all part of.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how interconnected we truly are.
And that interconnectedness has profound implications. It means that our thoughts, emotions, actions, they all create ripples in this energetic field, impacting not only ourselves, but also everyone around us.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility to consider, but it's also empowering. If we can learn to consciously manage our energy, we can potentially contribute to a more harmonious and positive collective experience.
Exactly. And that's the core message Grifasi wants Chiara to take away from the session. He reminds her that she has the power to choose what she allows into her energetic space, what she releases, and how she interacts with this vast interconnected web of consciousness.
So it's not just about banishing entities. It's about understanding that we are all energetic beings, constantly influencing and being influenced by the world around us.
Precisely. And by becoming more aware of these energetic dynamics, we can potentially create a more positive and fulfilling reality for ourselves and for everyone we touch.
Well, this deep dive has certainly challenged my perspective on a lot of things. We've explored the idea of energetic interference, delved into the complexities of past life influences, and even encountered some pretty unsettling examples of what can happen when energy is misused.
It's been a wild ride for sure, but ultimately I think the takeaway here is one of empowerment. We may not fully understand the intricacies of energy and consciousness, but we do have the power to choose how we interact with those forces.
And that choice, that responsibility, is something we carry with us every single day. So as we move forward, let's remember to be discerning about the information we encounter, trust our intuition, and consciously cultivate the kind of energy we want to bring into the world.
Beautifully said. It's been a fascinating exploration, and I hope you found it as thought-provoking as we have.
I know I have. And I want to thank you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning. And remember, the power to shape your reality lies within you.